Let's do it.
There we go. We're live. So how should I pronounce your name, or at least the one that's listed here on the screen?
So you can it's Paul is fine, but the proper pronunciation is Paweł. It's actually Polish. But my friends all call me something, a slight variation of that. Even my closest friends all call me something slightly different. So however rolls off the tongue works for me.
So, well, did you say Pavel? Is that correct?
Yeah, Pavel. And the way I would describe it to people is the W is actually like a V sound, similar to German.
Right.
And then the L is actually supposed to have a line through it, which makes it a W sound. So if you phonetically would spell it out, it would be Pavew. So Pavel.
Pavel.
There you go.
Not
Perfect.
So bad. Well, listen, man, thanks for joining me today. You responded to a tweet I put out a little while back. I'm doing a lot of these discussions lately where I just shoot out one of those tweets, and anyone who responds, basically we set up a chat, because I don't know, I just enjoy hearing from Bitcoiners out there in the wild, wherever they may be and whatever they're doing. It's always fun to hear a little bit about their story and what they're thinking about things. So how do you want to get it kicked off?
Maybe this is a first time, but I'd like to request to just throw out a prayer out there to start with that, just to kind of set the tone.
Sure.
I don't know if that's something that you've heard before, but if we could start there, that'd be awesome.
Sure. You just going to read it?
No, I'm just going to say really quickly, Father, we thank you so much for John. We thank you so much for what he's been able to do in this community with this amazing invention that we call Bitcoin, of corralling some of the legends in the space to really educate and help us understand what this truly is. We thank you for the opportunity to just chat with him today. We ask that it be profitable and fruitful, and that we reach folks to help them really seek truth and provide insights they wouldn't have otherwise had. In Jesus' name, amen.
Oh, that was beautiful. Great way to start the discussion. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I didn't really prepare too much, so I felt like I needed that just to kind of help me navigate this conversation, because it's not something I typically do.
Sure. I'm guessing, have you done, a podcast or an online interview or anything like that before?
I haven't. This is actually the first one.
Cool.
So I really appreciate the opportunity I love what you're doing of just trying to get plebs out there and just talk about the story and different walks and how Bitcoin's really impacted them. And for me, it's ultimately just been a really deep rabbit hole of just like pursuing truth and really getting to the first principles of anything and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I started off in the space in 2017 when a friend actually ironically introduced me to Ethereum. I don't know, it was like early 2017. It was around like $20. And although I really liked it, the economics of Bitcoin is what really hooked me in and really got me down the rabbit hole. And obviously 17 was a crazy year with the ICOs and all sorts of buzz around crypto, but there was something about Bitcoin that really drew me in from a foundational perspective of really changing the system as we know it. And I was big on economics in high school. I remember a close friend of mine who I'd lost touch with, but he was essentially the valedictorian, and he had such a FU attitude toward the system. I remember he introduced me to Ron Paul back in the day, and he was a big proponent of gold and sound monetary policy. And so when Bitcoin came out, I was already kind of on that track, and it was just powerful to see how there's a semblance of an opportunity to really get back to a standard that is incorruptible. Gold for the longest time in history has really been that, but it's had such a long track record. So for something like Bitcoin to really get introduced on the scene and offer some hope for this digital world was was really something that struck me, back in 2017 when I first learned about it. And then it just opened up rabbit holes left and right of understanding how the system works, how the Federal Reserve really works, and the underpinnings of society today.
Yeah.
Uh,
Uh, well, I obviously completely agree. Were you critical of all that stuff prior to learning about Bitcoin? Because some people fall down the rabbit hole, and as you said, like so much stuff needs to be recapitulated, it needs to be reformulated on a more truthful foundation, let's say. But for some people, that process starts when they start learning about Bitcoin, and for other people, it's more of a solution. And that's where the perspective I was coming from. I had perceived, the foundation of falsity, let's say, that so much of society was based on, and I was looking for something to resolve that, but prior to encountering Bitcoin, I hadn't found anything. Where was your head at when you in 2017?
for me, it was something similar, and it wasn't something that directly impacted me. So although I had my views, it wasn't like part of who I was, right? I understood that there was like corruption, but and then politics, but I didn't really involve myself in such a way that it really drew me in. In 2017, obviously it did a little bit, and we the crypto space and Bitcoin is very humbling in that, you're always looking for something better. And early on, before I had that solid foundation, I was still beginning my journey. I had my own views of the altcoins, and trying to get involved with the next big thing and opportunities. But over time, I realized that there's only one that's incorruptible, and that's Bitcoin. And so I would say that although I had those views, they were kind of loosely held.
Mhm.
And as time progressed and advanced, and I started learning about, the Federal Reserve in a more concrete way, and fractional reserve banking, and a lot of these things are just based on air and fluff, right? And that's the things that can be manipulated. I mean, even gold, right? There was this before 71, we were on the gold standard, but we don't know how much was being rehypothecated, how much was truly in reserves, right? And Bitcoin offers the opportunity to really provide a zero trust system, to provide a system that's based on, verifiability. And it's, don't trust, verify type of deal. And that's for the first time, we have a technology that we can base our economic system and financial monetary system on something that's verifiable. And we still have the counterparties that can fudge things that as we've seen with FTX.
Mhm.
But ultimately, people are seeing how the hands are being dealt, and really taking the time to understand how we can solve this problem. So I mean, between Bitcoin and COVID, it's been the most tremendous learning experience, right? Because all the stuff coming out, and all the things that previously, world leaders would get away with, is
Mhm.
now open in the air, and it's making people question so many more things. So as terrible as COVID was for me personally, man, it was an eye-opening experience to really start question everything from the system to politics, and the underpinnings of society. So it's been, as the difficult times have been with COVID, and with Bitcoin fluctuations. I obviously started in 2017, and have seen all sorts of dips and rises, and um, you start to get acclimated to what real truth is, right?
Mhm.
And what a solution might be for society that's based in truth and not on the words of politicians and leaders. So to answer your question, it started off with like a vague understanding and skepticism. I've always been a contrarian. Like all my friends say, "Oh, you just like to argue," but the reality is, I like to play devil's advocate to really arrive at that truth, right?
Right.
And not really just take things at face value anymore. And Bitcoin and I would say COVID have been really the eye-opening experiences that have led me down that path.
I really like that term, becoming acclimated to the truth, because I think that's a very good way to put it, because it if you've been living in a, well, a perception that's based on lies, or at least, you know, a lot of lies or falsehoods, then it can be abrupt, or it can be somewhat disorienting or disruptive if once you kind of inject a greater form of truth into your perception, or even ground it in one. And I think those two things that you mentioned, both COVID and Bitcoin, for a lot of people have really kind of shaken up the snow globe of their, you know, their perception of the world. And that
Right.
can be very disorienting, you know. And I think it's that's the last 2 years have really shown that. And I think that's why, well, I think that's the process people have been dealing with, is trying to figure out how to reorient themselves. One, in this world where it seems like the corruption and the unfairness and the greed and all that is just openly on display now for everyone to see, and where something like Bitcoin exists that is seemingly this, you know, incorruptible foundational form of truth, that if you align with it, if you adopt it, if you see through it and buy it, you can invite more truth into your life. And I think people are beginning to figure out just how rewarding that can be on every single level, from financial to personal to familial, relational, health, social. Like it's just it, and that must speak to its value. That must speak to, you know, the value of truth generally, that its impact, its positive impact is so broad and deep. And you know, I think what's happening now with all this, everyone getting wrecked, you know, using third parties and custodians and stuff, is kind of that process playing out in the financial realm, which is everyone's trying to treat this new phenomenon, this new entity in Bitcoin, like everything that's preceded it. And it just, the whole value of it is that you can interact with it, you can have a relationship with it that doesn't require all of the other baggage that, you know, everything else used to need. But people are, you know, people are trying to fit a, you know, square peg into a round hole, as it were. And I think people are getting wrecked as a result of that, because they're learning the hard way that this is an entirely new thing, and you need to constitute an entirely new relationship with it. You know, perhaps first as an entry, as a financial asset, but then, as you described, and as many of us are finding out, you know, as a basis to recapitulate and develop more clarity around pretty much everything, you know, everything in the realm of value, which is everything, you know, all action, basically.
Yeah, and the the other thing is, like, we never really had an asset where to transact value in such a intimate way, right? The financial system has always required intermediaries, and the fact that we can take the base currency now, and validate it and transact with it is just incredibly powerful to
Mm.
disintermediate the system that is arguably the root of all corruption, which is, you know, fiat money. And to be able to have this tool to bypass any corruptible, you know, players is just remarkable. It's incredible to have something like this. And I really love the way Jack Mallers describes it, of this is the first time we're innovating with money since like the 60s or whatever, when the credit card came out,
Mhm.
right? I remember his speech at Bitcoin, the conference where in Miami, where he talked about, um, where we talked about that progression and how all financial transactions are essentially debt based. And this here we have an instrument where you can transact value without debt and immediately, you know, send it to a person in a couple of seconds right now with Lightning. So it's just it's wild. It's something that I think people are still not grasping, but you know, with people like yourself and all the promoters, all the incredible thought leaders, it's growing. And with the fiascos, you know, it's flushing out a lot of the puffery and a lot of the you know, cognitive dissonance that there is around this system, that it's unchangeable, that we'll never be able to get out of it and end the corruption, because it's living proof. Like it, and the fact that it, you know, there's the ups and the downs, but we have to realize it's only a few years old. And the fact
Mhm.
that it's taken, it's withstood the powers that be that have historically controlled everything. It's just incredible. And
Yeah.
so it's awesome to have this and be able to explain it to people. And as this craziness is going on, I mean, look at FTX. They didn't have any Bitcoin on their balance sheet. So it's a great way to say, wait, hold up. If someone says, oh, FTX is collapsing, I don't trust any crypto. It's like, okay, let's unwind that a little bit. Let's understand, use it as an opportunity to really explain to them, this has nothing to do with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the solution to all this. um, and so it's just incredible to really slowly but surely continue to establish confidence in this and be able to bring others in and explain what that means. These people yell and complain that it's volatility, but it's that volatility that is crucial and important early on to help others get in and to help others um, get involved in a way that can be meaningful, right? Because if we kept skyrocketing after it hit 60K and it just kept going up, it'd be unattainable for most people. So
Mhm.
this is just a awesome opportunity. For the first time, we have plebs front running, financial institutions. And there's still a lot of corruption, still a long march ahead, but it offers hope. And I really love Saylor's kind of shtick of Bitcoin is hope, because I think it ultimately reigns true in every facet of life.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's funny. I was talking with my mom yesterday, and she, her friends and people she knew were talking about the crypto blow up and crypto is dead and all that kind of stuff. And she was telling me how she was telling them, guys, you got to realize that crypto and Bitcoin are totally separate. They're not in the same class at all. And she was telling me, like, they just don't get it. I don't know why they don't get it. I was like, oh, my heart was like exploding. It was a proud moment.
Not not everyone has such a good teacher like yourself.
But it's interesting. We talk about this, you know, uh, influence on how you perceive things that this is having. And, it's no secret that a lot of people in Bitcoin are critical of, the system of politics and the system, the financial system and many other ways in which things work, especially after the last 2 years. And I never really thought about it quite in these terms, but I think an easy heuristic might not be the right word, or maybe, let's see, but you could say the the products, let's take fiat currency. What does it allow in terms of what bubbles up from, that mechanism or tool? Well, because it allows for theft, both, direct and indirect through inflation, then you get these institutions that are highly corruptible, that become enormously powerful, that, tip the scales in favor of a select few, that create an increasingly unfair, disproportionate system. All that stuff we know. And we could say, well, that is permitted by what we think is just unethical, which is the ability to steal from someone, right? And so as a result, all the products of that attribute of that tool have to be, thrown out, basically. Whereas we have
Mhm.
something like Bitcoin and we say, what are the ethics of Bitcoin? And, some of them are at least can't be stolen from. I will not steal from you. You can't be stolen from if you treat this properly. And so whatever bubbles up from a tool or mechanism with those ethics imbued into it ought to be considered good, I think. And so I think, part of the reason why so many of us are so, uh, ready and willing to dismiss the current system as it is because we know just on principle that it is the way that it is. It is the shape, it is the size, it is all that based on an unethical mechanism. And so,
Mm.
because a lot of people will criticize Bitcoiners oftentimes for being so, dismissive. And, whether you're an anarchist or a libertarian or whatever, it's like, the whole dialogue about, what system of governance is best. And there's a progressive view and all this kind of view. But the real question is, well, what institution of power, let's say, of, what central authority would be legitimate on a Bitcoin system, with a money where you cannot be stolen from? What should we expect to bubble up? And I don't know the answer to that. I suspect we'll find out through the course of our history, whether or not you and I are around to witness it. But I think we will find out like what social institutions emerge when nobody can be stolen from. You know, at the very least, you would expect that they're going to be voluntary. And so I think based on that, they're going to be more equal than they are today. But I do think it means that it's just easier to discredit and dismiss the ones we currently have because we know they're based on theft. You know, so you can argue till you're blue in the face about the merits of, you know, progressive, democratic socialism, you know, whatever systems of governance we have around the world today. You know, people talk about the Scandinavian countries, and they obviously lean quite socialist or have over the years, but it's like they're all discredited because they're all way bigger and have way more power and authority than they ought to by virtue of the fact that they're able to steal from people. And so they're all thrown out. And, you know, so I bring up that example just as one way of having a new heuristic or filter by which to look at all the institutions that we engage with in society and say, are they predicated on ethical or moral grounds? If not, then they need to be, if not, you know, thrown out, they need to be reconstructed. They need to be, you know, rehashed in some way. And if they are, and you know, it might be a challenge to find them in this day and some in this day and age that actually are, but I suspect that the institutions that grow up around Bitcoin, however they end up looking, we will perceive them as being ethical because they won't exist unless we desire them to, because they won't be able to fund themselves, you know. And this is the fascinating or tumultuous period that you and I find ourselves in, because, you know, we're at the very beginning of this story. You know, our grandkids, you know, will probably be in a very different era, but we're in the one where all those institutions that derive their power and size based on that unethical behavior of being able to steal from people, they are going to bump up against not being able to fund themselves if everything goes, you know, if Bitcoin survives and keeps going, because people will be less and less able to be stolen from. And so what happens when those formerly Leviathan institutions are no longer able to fund themselves? I mean, you know, will they go quietly, I guess? And you know, that's the thing that I suspect you and I are going to find out.
Yeah, so I completely agree with everything that you say. And one thing I'll add is, first of all, they won't go quietly. But second of all, you know, many people, many really smart people that have been following this in more depth, like the Federal Reserve and the fiat system, knew that from before Bitcoin was a thing. But the problem was, you know, are you really going to hit yourself to a problem that there's no solution to?
Mm.
And the fact that there is a way out, an opportunity to opt out, really gives just immense power to the folks who had those beliefs, but there was no hope, right? Like, how are you going to overcome the elephant in the room, you know, of that controls everything, when there's no perceivable solution, right? And so, like, the idea that this is now Bitcoin is the hope for really changing the paradigm, from really changing the system, is unbelievable, right? And as we're slowly learning, you know, with the whole fiasco of FTX, you know, some people on the surface are like, oh, it's dead, you know, this is over. But in reality, this is the best thing that could have happened. Imagine if the house of cards was continued to be propped up in a way that FTX becomes, you know, too big to fail, right? They had the right strategy by lining the right pockets and moving forward with regulators and politicians that would give them credibility, and really allow this thing to be built on air. And so the fact that it came down when it did, I mean, that's just the biggest blessing ever. I mean, look at that. They were all based on fraud and this fake token that people get excited about when they think of crypto. But it fell, and we're lucky that it did when it did, because, you know, what happened last time a group collaborated and colluded in Jekyll Island, you know, we got the fiat system. So I think it's a huge blessing that this came out when it did. And sure, it caused hurt, and that's terrible for you know, for individuals that lost it. But I think the vast majority were large, you know, more bigger money institutions that were investing in this in hopes of getting a piece of the controlled, strategy here and being on the inside. And so I think we're just lucky that it happened the way it did. And that, I mean, look at what's coming out. I'm sure you've heard all the stories of the fallout, not only just FTX being a fraud, but all the other things that of connections to regulators and folks that are really you would think are supposed to be looking for our best interests. But how can you say that's true when now you got, the congressional committee that's leading the investigation is now was meeting with SBF regularly, right? So people are starting to see that this is deeper than it looks, than it's perceived. And you see the Bitcoin coming off exchanges in record amounts, and it's really cool to have this tool that you can literally say, F you, I'm done, and I'm opting out, and look at the crunches that are going to happen once that there's less liquidity, right? And there's debts to be paid. There's still obviously a lot of unknown with Genesis and DCG, but man, it's really cool. I know there's a lot of hurt, but it's through these difficulties that it just grows stronger, right? It becomes less fragile, and it's just great to see,
I mean, I share that sentiment exactly, but like anyone who's not a Bitcoiner would just think you're a crazy person, right? Because you're seeing all this carnage, and you're like, it's just so great to see. But I mean, it's inevitable, right? So what are you going to do? I mean, this is just what happens when you encounter the immovable object that is Bitcoin. And like I said, everyone tries to act like it's not what it is, or treat it differently, or treat it the way things used to be treated. And you're going to get wrecked doing that. And it seems to be the case that people have to get wrecked over and over and over and over again before they learn that this is something altogether different. And you need to adjust your mental frameworks, how you want to, act, how you want to be an entrepreneur or provide value in the world, and conform to it, because it's not going to conform to you. I saw, you probably saw that Travis talk about how his fund got blown up.
Yeah.
And, and then there's this video, I don't know when it was from, but he was basically saying how, like, they wanted to get more AUM under management. And like, you can't really sell just being like a Bitcoin custodian, right? Because like people will just buy it from an exchange and custody it themselves, or buy the ETF or something. So you got to make it a little bit more spicy, So we got all these shitcoins on, and then you can be a shitcoin manager, and then people are going to pay you because they don't know anything about that shit. And so you're the one that knows it. And so, you're the expert they have to pay. And that's how you get more, funds, AUM in your fund. And I think he said something like he had the 1% allocation of Bitcoin. And then I guess all their stuff was custodied with FTX, and they got blown up. And it's like, man, when are you going to learn? When are you going to?
That's what the system is. Like it incentivizes greed and the next best thing, and opportunities and trying to outperform, and that's just the reality of the financial world, right? Especially these folks who are trying to look for return. They get bought into this rat race of hey, how am I gonna create more value? But the reality is, you can't create value, right? You have to accumulate it over time. And if you're going to be taking these high risk bets that, people, FTX, they have a stadium, they have an arena, they have all these naming rights, they have politicians, right? And it's like, they're too big to, nothing's going to happen. And you start to have cognitive dissonance of like, they can't fail. And then you get caught up in the opportunity to get rich and get more money and attract more investors. And then the reality is you got to come to some kind of basis, right? And that's where Bitcoin comes in, of the only one that actually provides, true value that's secured by energy, right? Over history, since humankind began, it was, and the invention of currency, it was typically backed by some sort of value. And that was work. We're essentially transacting our effort and energy in some way for money. And now we're able to do so and store it. Like, I love the concept that that Bitcoin is a financial battery, because it's the only way that you can accumulate money. Like, you can't undo any of the hashing that was used to create any of that electricity. It's stored in this digital virtual currency that can be verified, and there's no undoing any of that, right? So all that energy that was spent is accumulating, and continues to build value. And there's volatility, but in the long term, I think truth wins out.
Well, amen to that. And I agree. It seems to me so indicative that people are still living in the fiat paradigm when they engage in all this risky stuff with shitcoins and everything else. It's some version of rent seeking, really. And you're trying to capitalize on people's ignorance and all that kind of stuff. Whereas once you enter the Bitcoin paradigm, I mean, your whole relationship and understanding of value begins to change. And I think it must be said that when you encounter something that's so unchanging, I think the only possible response, and what I alluded to a few minutes ago, is that you have to change, because it's the one, it's the one that can't. And I think that's what instills the humility that we often talk about. It's because you have to humble yourself before this thing and realize that it's you who has to conform to how this thing operates and how this thing is emerging in the world, because it's going to be, let's say, the dominant economic force, the dominant determinant of economic activity. And if you don't do that, you'll probably you'll probably crash up against the rocks of it at some point, because you've chosen a different approach. But if you do, you start to develop this humility, and you start to, think about, how do I really want to constitute my relationship to this thing? And how do I want to create value in this world that this thing is bringing about? And I think it seems to inspire very different approaches. You don't have, well, like in the Bitcoin space, like anyone who's, a rent seeker or a charlatan or, full of shit and that kind of stuff. I mean, that stuff gets snuffed out really quickly. People, this space seems to be very intent on identifying value and rewarding genuine, humble value, and, discarding, or at the very least criticizing, anything other than that. And I think that's great, because, well, I think that's the best way to find the truth of any form of value, right? Is to have that type of approach to assessing it. But it's gonna take time. And again, I think this process will probably repeat, even if we go up the next cycle or however it transpires, there'll be another cohort of people that try to, do this whole thing again and act like they're better than Bitcoin, or they know more, there's the next big thing or whatever. But one last thing I wanted to mention was your point about hope is so apt, right? Because, and this was my condition, my state as a gold bug before, it's like, it's not a very, there's no real hope. I mean, you're just kind of, you're like, well, there's nothing else to do, so I'll hold some gold. And if shit really hits the fan, then I guess I'll be okay. I'm not really sure that, like, Joe down the street who sells bread is going to accept gold coins. Like, bullets or dried food or whatever would probably be a better medium of exchange in those environments. But whatever, what are you going to do? This is what people do. And now with Bitcoin, it's such a hopeful, productive, positive solution. And I think that's just invigorating a whole generation of people, the so-called Bitcoiners, that it's really bringing people to life, because when you there's a nihilism that's induced when you're living in a system that you disagree with and you can't see any solution to. Of course, that's going to induce nihilism, because you just throw up your hands. You're like, well, what am I going to do about it? There's no way around this. So, like, I'll just get my kicks. I'll carve out my own little niche, whatever. But, and I think that's so many people. I mean, nearly everybody, I think, is kind of victim to that in some capacity. But when you see a genuine solution to the biggest problems, I just think it brings you alive. Like, it expands your horizons so dramatically. And as we're saying, it delivers a sense of clarity on so many things that now you just end up like, now the task is trying to figure out, what is it you want to pursue in this new emerging world? What is the thing that's most meaningful to you? And how can you bring the most value into the world? How can you contribute? What are your greatest strengths, or the things that you're most capable of that you can contribute? And that is such a profound impact on just how you think, how you see the world, how you see yourself, your day-to-day life, how you wake up in the morning, how you treat yourself, how you treat the people in your life. Like, it influences everything. And the fact that it is actually happening, well, I mean, it's why I love doing these conversations with people like yourself, because I get to just see, and hear from people in all different places, with no like massive following, no name recognition, but just people out there for whom this is real, this
Mhm.
impact or this effect is happening in them. And it's so consistent. And man,
Yeah.
like, and I guess my point in saying that is like, how can you not respect and devote everything to that? And how can you not cherish that? How can you look at that and be like, nah, I want to try to make 2 and 20 on a bunch of shit coins? Like, the former is so much more rich and beautiful and important and truthful. And you're fucking around playing fiat games and trying to rip people off because what? Because, you want more money than you want genuine good to emerge in the world through you, and and have everyone have the same ability to access that, amongst other things. I mean, we could go on with the superlatives with Bitcoin, but it's so crazy to me that people choose the shitty fiat games versus this just tremendous phenomenon that's emerging, that's so deeply meaningful to so many people.
So you know what? I say this as a Bitcoin financial maximalist, but I see the appeal to altcoins and other applications of tokens or currencies or blockchain. But the problem is, human nature is inherently greedy. And so when these new tokens arrive that maybe have altruistic, you know, um, goals of helping advance society in a different way, you can't really, I feel like that has to all be put on hold until we have consensus in the financial paradigm, which is by far the most important one, right? And that's what Bitcoin offers, because the system right now is so corrupt. So when some good, incredible innovator entrepreneur comes up with this idea of how to use blockchain, which I think there's many applications for, that I think, tokenomics could be a rational conversation and discussion and justification could be made. But the reality is human nature is going to always try to be greedy and maximize, return. So they're going to make sacrifices for the short term in these altcoins, not recognizing that we need to first establish a solid base in the financial monetary paradigm, which is Bitcoin, right? Because I think there will be applications for smart contracts and stuff like that. But until, we're never going to get rid of the human condition of greed and wanting to make more money, that it first has to come with financial change, right? And monetary change that has been historically impossible. Now that we have this avenue, until that's established, I don't have any confidence in the altcoins or the shitcoins. Even if a rational justification could be made for them, until Bitcoin gets a much stronger adoption, in the worldwide economy.
Do you not? So are you saying that you think there will be applications like not on Bitcoin? You think there'll be, I don't know, quasi monies, tokens that are legitimate, not on Bitcoin in the future?
I don't know, because I know helium, for example, is a coin that I don't know how there has to be some kind of tighter peg between Bitcoin and some of the solutions that I potentially maybe see an opportunity for. Because the telecom is one thing that is very monopolized in this country, right?
Hmm.
And so how do you incentivize the opportunity to create a opt-out for telecom? And I think that's in the vein of what helium was trying to do. And I'm just speaking on this because what's his face made a comment about it, Bill Ackman. And I just think those things will fail because we haven't firmly established the king, right, which is Bitcoin. Yeah, and after that, I think there might be opportunity. This is very loosely held for me, that other tokens be used, but I think the ones in the near term that aren't supporting the Bitcoin ecosystem in some way, and I'm not sure what that exactly looks like, are going to fail. But there, in theory, the idea of incentivizing a new network that you can communicate through in a distributed fashion is a powerful one.
Sh- Sure.
But
But why wouldn't
but
you use the strongest incentive, which is the dominant money, though? Like you could integrate Bitcoin into other communications and all sorts of different networks. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with Keep, but that's just a very basic, recent one where they,
Mhm.
use doing video conferencing through hole punch technology. I don't know much about it, but you can send sats back and forth. And I think that will be the direction things go. Like all sorts of different applications will be built for communications and information and value transfer over the internet. And sats will be the currency for doing so. I think all of these people that are saying, we need a token to bootstrap the incentives for the network, they're just trying to print their own money again. They're reintroducing
100%.
seniorage, they're pre-mining the shit. And ultimately, if they're, it's like intranet kind of, right? Like if your token is only good in your network, but there's another token outside of your network that's good for all networks or more networks, which one is going to have the more powerful incentive? And so why not just integrate that one rather than starting money again from scratch or a
100%.
money?
And that's probably how it's going to pan out. I guess the coupling between these infrastructures and Bitcoin is the key. And I think, like I said, it's going to fail when you're trying to use that as a way of propping up the value of something, right? Creating this token. So these technologies and Lightning and Sats, and integration in ways that are probably beyond my understanding, are probably the solution to it. I'm just saying that the ideas behind some of these is good. It's just their attempt to fund it in a way is kind of going back to the whole fiat. Let's create something out of nothing. So I don't.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying exactly is the way it's going to play out. There's got to be that tether and support of the king ecosystem, which is incorruptible, and that is Bitcoin.
Yeah. And I think this goes back to being humble, right? Like I do think there will be the ability to integrate economic incentives and payments into every form of protocol and network and all that kind of stuff on the internet. And that will be Bitcoin. And that is the only rational thing to do. But the humble part is not doing it before it's ready. Like you may want to, to build the world computer in 2017, but there's an order of events here and there's a building on, the proper foundations. And perhaps like I think it's all going to occur in its due course. And I think that is what's happening with Bitcoin. But I just, so many people, as you said, I mean, there is some ignorance, be it willful or not, where people engage in this stuff because they genuinely think this is the way to bootstrap their new approach to doing something, right? And then there's a lot of maliciousness as well. But I just think the best, approach or heuristic or principle here is to say that it's unethical to create a new money, basically at this stage. And Satoshi did it, and the way he did it was, basically as good as it could be. He did it anonymously before anybody knew, how to take advantage of it, basically. And he stepped away, not taking any benefit for himself, right? And if anyone else out there is willing to do that as well, then have at it. The economic well, the head start that Bitcoin has on any of that stuff will just make it irrelevant in the course of time. But no one's willing to do that because they all want to generate, an economic gain for themselves. So like there's this like the reason why I say willful ignorance is because you come up with this great new idea to do whatever, X for Y, revolutionize telecoms or whatever it is, and you convince yourself that you need to create a new money to bootstrap, the incentive structure of the network. And part of the reason why you convince yourself of that, in my opinion, is because it's beneficial to you, because you're the one who's starting it, and you'll be able to, buy up, mine, whatever, allocate a bunch of the coins originally. And now you've become a central banker, basically. You've, the irony of it all is that the whole philosophy of shitcoining is that everyone gets to create their own money. Whereas the whole philosophy of Bitcoin is that nobody gets to create money. And that's what's so revolutionary about it. And so I just think, again, I mean, Matt Odell nailed it, right? Stay humble, stack sats. And people, I think, fail to fully interpret or internalize the first part, which is stay humble in relation to how you think this should proceed and how fast it's proceeding. Like, it's something incredibly important is being built here, and it's probably not going to happen on the timeline that you think is possible. Now, that message could be interpreted as like anti-innovation, of course, right? But I'm all for innovation, but I'm also for recognizing the innovation that has happened here with money, and you don't need to create a new money. You don't need to become another central banker. And most importantly, you don't need to get people wrecked in the process, because there's a lot of people out there that don't have the same understanding that you or I or these people that are building these projects have, and they're easily misled. And, in a sense, that's their own responsibility, and that's their own problem. Like, they should educate themselves so they're not misled. But at the same time, you shouldn't mislead people, and you should educate yourself sufficiently so that, in your actions, you're not accidentally misleading someone. And I think that's where a lot of the shitcoin people fall down. They don't, a little bit of willful ignorance and a little bit of playing to their own incentives, a little bit of greed, and a little bit not taking enough responsibility for educating themselves before they offer something to the world.
So you said something that I want to double click on. You said it was the sequencing. I think that's so incredibly important to the theme of what I was trying to say, probably not so eloquently, is that we need to establish Bitcoin first before these innovative things can happen, right? Because if you're trying to take on a telecom industry, like, that's a huge risk. So who really wants to risk their Bitcoin in its infancy, at 16K right now, on something that is likely to fail, right? And so I think when all these things will start happening in a way that's Bitcoin centric, once it matures a little bit more, right, and that the value is recognized, right, the price discovery happens, and that it's more widely adopted, then you could really start building out on top of it and taking those kind of risky bets versus something that, oh, I can buy this speculative new token that was created out of nothing, but the reward would potentially be huge if it succeeds. So I think it's just a matter of sequencing, right? Once there's price discovery and you recognize that, and Bitcoin's value is reflective of its adoption, of the energy put into it, then we'll start seeing, the people be more willing to take those risky bets on, using that as the core currency and the core value proposition to build out these new technologies and this new infrastructure.
Sure. I mean, so there's two things, right? One, a lot of new technology and a lot of innovation can happen without a native monetary incentive, right? Like, you can build the next internet app or whatever, and you can either do it on fiat rails, which is not advisable, but right now you could do it on Bitcoin rails, and you could either have Bitcoin payments built in, or you could do something like podcasting 2.0. Like, that's opening up a massive opportunity space for new applications to integrate this, frictionless ability to communicate and transfer value. And so, that alone, there is so much innovation already right now able to happen with that capability that it currently exists. So but even without that, a lot of innovation can still happen without Bitcoin, but without an integration of Bitcoin. But as you say, like, I agree, there's still a long ways to go in Bitcoin's own adoption, right? And so I think, that should be priority number one. And for a lot of people, that's not sexy. It's like, well, I can't print my own money and make $100 million by, whatever, working on Bitcoin or contributing to Bitcoin. I don't know if you saw there was a tweet going around, I think BTC Sessions put it out, but the bankless guys, Kobe, I don't know if any of this is true, but he said the bankless guys were charging like $250K a month for like a shitcoin sponsorship on their show. And, you know, all the Bitcoin podcasters were like, you guys get paid, you know, that kind of shit. Cause, you know, even those of us who run a few ads definitely ain't getting that kind of cheese. So it's not as sexy, but it is what it is, right? Like, you know, what are you here for? Are you here for the principles, or are you here for the fiat gains? And so I think there's a lot of work to be done still in Bitcoin. I also think there's a lot of, you know, opportunity for innovation that hasn't yet been tapped yet, even as things exist. But to your point, the opportunity cost of investing Bitcoin right now is tremendous, right? Because, you know, Bitcoin is still basically at the bottom of its S curve. And so as far as, you know, the circular Bitcoin investment economy, if we want to call it that, I mean, most people are going to default to saying, no, the opportunity cost is too great. I'm going to hang on to my sats and just wait. But at a point in time in the future, whether it's 10 or 20 and 30 years, where, you know, Bitcoin appreciates, you know, the purchasing power appreciation of Bitcoin is, you know, roughly equal to productivity, you know, so let's say it's 5% a year, 10%, whatever it is, then I think there's going to be an explosion of innovation and investment, because, you know, people are going to say, yeah, I want to see these things in the world. I want to take a little bit extra risk with my capital. You know, I want to invest in a good team and a good project. And then we'll see just like the type of innovation or the scale of innovation that will happen in that period will probably, you know, more than make up for the decade or two of relatively little investment, because people were just kind of, the network was, Bitcoin was becoming distributed and the network was just kind of getting going. And so again, I just think it's about patience, humility, and we don't even, you know, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, because the things of the greatest value will emerge and they'll stick and they'll be successful, and all the other garbage will fall away. Again, and I actually don't, I'll probably sound like a horrible person here, but I don't have that much sympathy for people that get wrecked by it, because I do think it's primarily their own responsibility. But that being said, you know, I think it's every individual's responsibility to limit the degree to which they participate in people getting wrecked. And for those people that promote, you know, all this bullshit, it's, you know, being more educated about what's going on and being more ethical with their behavior and scrutinizing their plans more carefully first, so that they don't wind up in a situation where they're leading people astray. Because, you know, there's obviously a shitload of example, you know, FTX is a prime example of that now. And I don't know, maybe this is a way for people to understand that, like, in an unregulated system like Bitcoin, like where there's nobody coming to save you, you need to be a lot more careful about greed and malice and all that kind of stuff, right? Don't trust, verify, like that, take that to heart, because there's going to be a lineup of people out there wanting to screw you. And in this new world, there ain't no FDIC coming to save you. If the bank goes under, if they fuck around with your savings, it's all gone. And so this is the intense degree of personal responsibility that is required of people to take if they want to engage in this new world. And that is something that's so foreign to people, because in the modern world, we've relinquished so much of our responsibility to all sorts of different things. We've delegated it elsewhere, anywhere but ourselves. And now this thing is saying, you know, you can have all the benefits, you can bring that truth into your life, but you need to take a commensurate amount of responsibility in order to do so. And, you know, the Bitcoiners are the first cohort that are saying, all right, let's do it. And it's tough and it's challenging. It's daunting sometimes, but the rewards are incredibly worthwhile. But a lot of people aren't yet willing to take that step, and they want to have that in between where they have their cake and eat it too. Like, oh, give me the gains and give me all the excitement, give me all that stuff. But no, I don't want any of that responsibility stuff yet. And the simple truth that they're coming to understand is that's not an option that's available. You're only going to get wrecked. That's the road to perdition, you know? And that's
I
how
love
people
that.
learn, I guess.
And what I really like about the Bitcoin community is everyone keeps each other in check. There's no like unified, you know, stance of, oh, hey, this is Bitcoin. No, they're pursuit of truth. They'll make contrarian takes. They'll play devil's advocate in pursuit of truth. And to your point about the bankless guys, I never really got good vibes. You know, it was more like they were trying to push something. And, you know, just like all the other BitBoy or whatever, all these other promoters, you know, the truth's coming out.
Yeah.
And that's just like the beauty of this community of pursuing truth and holding each other accountable. for some of the even, quote unquote, Bitcoin folks who have kind of veered off the path a little bit, it's humbling, and you're held accountable for those decisions that you make and those things that you promote or sponsor or sponsored by, accept sponsorships from. And it helps build that system of trust, helps build that system of strength and of anti-fragility, because those folks who invest in FTX, I'm sure they're recognizing now where their mistakes were, and they're being held accountable through Twitter. I think Twitter is just an incredible tool, of like holding people accountable and having that track record, keeping the receipts. It's just powerful. And I think people, that at the top that are either accepting truth and pursuing it, or are going to be convinced of it very humbly. And so I just think it's an incredible tool, and yeah, it's an evolving into strength, which I think is very encouraging to see the way it's playing out.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so many of these folks now are like decrying the whole industry, like, what are we even doing here? And I can't believe all this stuff. And, all of us Bitcoiners are just like, what are you talking about? We've been telling you this is going to happen for like a decade. I mean, we've been screaming at you. This is what all the laser eye and, all the stuff that you referred to as toxic. I mean, this is what it was all about. And now you're crying because exactly what you were told was going to happen 100, million times is now happening. You can't help but have a little chuckle at it, and enjoy the carnage.
Speaking of Twitter, it just creates this very weird loop of truth of even other areas. Bitcoiners, I'll take a Bitcoiner's word on a topic that's completely, separate from Bitcoin and monetary policy over some other, blue check. And it's just so powerful how it's created this sense of pursuit of things, of uncovering, lies and deception. I love the way Elon Musk put it. I think he said something that sunlight is the best disinfectant, when he was first looking to buy Twitter. Mm-hmm. And it's so true, because as we've seen with all the censorship and bullshit that was going on, a lot of things have been suppressed, and I think we're entering a period of change. I was just talking to some friends the other day of how I don't typically use social media. Twitter I do, but some of the other stuff, they're like, it's crazy how much is going on Instagram now, of people talking about health things and things that are going on behind the scenes, and really exposure of truths. And I think that's largely been driven and opened up because of what's happening with Twitter. The other platforms are recognizing that where people are gravitating to truth, and they're trying to lax up their own policies to facilitate that, or else they're going to lose traffic, right? So I think we're entering a really interesting and awesome period of transparency, and or at least more transparency than we've historically had. And I'm just excited how Bitcoin is also tuning into that notion of everything needs to be questioned, everything needs to be picked apart and investigated from first principles again, right? From understanding what the causes, and now that we're really letting up on the censorship, truth is really getting out in all sorts of aspects, whether it's the whole seed oils thing, or the fact of how beef is so nutritious, and valuable, and how the sentiment of like whole grains and stuff was more trendy than it was based in science and what the biological needs of the body are. So it's just like a really cool how it connects you with a community that's looking to improve and get better in all aspects, not just Bitcoin and the financial system.
Yeah. Well, I do think that is part of the process of pursuing truth. Like, I don't really think you can be genuinely on that journey without being updated as you go, as you kind of zero in on different forms of truth. Like, you're kind of, the premise of embarking on that is saying, like, I'll change when I'm confronted with truth in whatever domain or capacity. Like, I'm willing to do that. I see the value, like the redemptive capacity of integrating truth when I encounter it, or at least a greater truth than I previously held. So I'll change if I encounter it. And then, you just keep doing that, and you wind up, a year, 2, 5 years down the road, and you realize like, wow, I'm pretty different than I was back then, because I've, as a result of being on that journey and being receptive to being changed or upgrading your thinking when confronted with, better evidence or more, what seems to be greater logic or rationale or more truthful information. And I agree. I mean, it's invigorating. It's so cool to have, I mean, my personal orientation was always kind of like that, but I just felt very kind of alienated. And now that seemingly there's a ever growing culture of people that are kind of oriented the same way, that are asking those same questions. And to your point, like, you'll take a Bitcoiner's word, you're more likely to take a Bitcoiner's word than, perhaps someone else, some blue check mark on Twitter. And I think that's because, like, you already, just by virtue of knowing that they're a hardcore Bitcoiner, you kind of know you line up on a lot of values, and you kind of know you're seeing things in a similar way, and that you're approaching things in a similar way. And so if they've taken the time to come to a conclusion on something, you're probably fairly comfortable that, like, had you taken a similar amount of time to investigate it, you probably would have come to something of a similar conclusion, because you're looking at it through a more similar lens than you probably are with the blue check mark. And, and the whole discourse in Bitcoin land, like, of course, we'll overshoot the mark and we'll get things wrong. I mean, it's an ongoing discussion, right? And that's what I love about it, because, there's usually pretty entrenched views on both sides, and people, like, go for it. And there's this ongoing vigorous debate about whatever particular issue. And through that process, we continue to just kind of triangulate in on truth. And then we get to upgrade our own thinking about that. And, the same is true in the domain of understanding Bitcoin itself, right? Like, you hear Saylor on a new rip, or GG, or any of the people that you really respect, and you hear them articulate an aspect of this in a way that you hadn't considered before. And then you just, like, cool, like, click, you put it into your mind, you chew on it for a while, or, next time you're having a quiet moment, you think about it some more, and then it just becomes part of your understanding of the thing. And on you go, right on, further on down the rabbit hole, as you try to recapitulate everything. And it kind of makes sense, right? Like, you were saying that a lot of so-called normies are waking up to just how much they've been lied to, or how much falsity there is out there. I mean, doesn't it make sense that if everything is predicated on immoral, unethical,
Motives.
dishonest, behavior and motives, like, if we go back to that premise of, like, those things being an integral part of the money, and the money being basically what determines the structure of, everything downstream, from science to academia, politics, finance, economics, media, everything, then wouldn't you kind of expect that, like, when people were starting to step outside of that, when people were starting to realize that there's another fundamental, truth, a fundamental incentive that's orienting things, that they start to kind of pull themselves out of the morass or the fog of that, untruth, and kind of, maybe wander through the forest, wander through the desert for a few years, and then find themselves again. I mean, I feel like that is to be expected. And so, like, I think that's often why we call it clown world, right? Or upside down world, because it's almost like perfectly inverted, right? You're going from a fundamental basis of dishonesty and corruption and unethical incentives, or bad incentives, or whatever, to one where it's fundamentally honest, where it's fundamentally incorruptible, where the incentives are fundamentally true, or the incentives are fundamentally, pristine, let's say. And that, I mean, that's just seems like a 180. It seems like a complete inversion of what we've had. And so you kind of expect, like we said at the beginning, everything to kind of be not only recapitulated, but, in many cases, opposite to what we thought, and this is why Bitcoiners seem so contrarian, probably why, it was a kind of easy layup for you to come into Bitcoin, because that's certainly the impression, right? A lot of people outside of Bitcoin land think Bitcoiners are a bunch of crazy people, right? And, but contrarian is definitely one of them. And I think if your worldview is predicated on the old model of all the institutions being legitimate, and this is how things should be, and you come across a group of people that are suggesting that all those institutions need to be upgraded, and that they're, based on false premises, and that, everything's going to look quite differently, well, then those are two fairly divergent worldviews. And of course they're going to come into conflict, at least in the realm of ideas. And good, because, that's how we legitimize. I mean, we have to subject these ideas to that kind of rigor, because that's how ultimately we legitimize them. I think the economic reality of Bitcoin is just going to continue to assert itself, but obviously we exist in the social world as well. And in the social world, occasionally we have to defend our ideas. And I think it's good that we're all like, it's almost like Bitcoin Twitter is like a ludus, like the old gladiator training facility, where like everyone's just like really sharpening their swords and getting, good at their arguments and all that kind of stuff, so that when they go out, like they're ready to engage in this dialogue. And I don't know.
Right. And that's
I think that's how the culture continues to grow and emerge.
100%. And you learn about the mistakes that you make, and you reflect, and then you come back to the core, which is truth in Bitcoin. And it's just like a continual evolution that, like I said, I keep repeating myself, but it just strengthens and it evolves into something that's less fragile. And with people's education about it, it just continues to grow, and others become more convinced and convicted, and bring others into the loop. And that's how it grows. So I think it's awesome.
Have you, I mean, it's kind of a personal question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but have you, since 2017, when you got into this, have you noticed any sort of, changes in perspective or habits or lifestyle or any of that stuff?
Yeah, I would say becoming much, and I don't know how much of it is causation versus correlation, but becoming so much more of a minimalist. And it's like, you don't need the things that signal, wealth, or signal prosperity, or signal, some sort of status, right? I've become much more anchored in education and understanding, right? And that's led me to be like, I like to have nice things, but they're not for show, right? It's not a vanity thing. It's more for function, or enjoyment of life. And I've become so much of a minimalist that, like, I don't want material things. I don't need material things insofar as they they promote my lifestyle, or encourage me to, or enable me to enjoy life with friends and family, and help expose them to truths. Like, I don't use social media anymore, and it it annoys me to be part of conversations that are so irrelevant. Like, even sports, like, I don't like, besides, I'm a big Buffalo Bills fan, but besides that, like, I don't care what's going on in the sports world, right? Like, because that's not important. It's fun to watch a game every once in a while, but it's like, it's not meaningful. It's not improving my lifestyle. It's not core to the important things. So I would say that Bitcoin's really helped shift my focus into things that matter, both materially and just kind of mentally, and my understanding of things. But it's been weird. I like that question, because it has changed my mindset in a way that, like, material things don't matter. It's more about educating myself and educating those around me, and helping others grow through the process.
Do you have any thoughts on what it is that's inspired that change? Like, what process is at play, or, any ideas of why that's happened?
Partially because of how the exposure of, I mentioned, since Bitcoin and COVID have really made me understand things from a more first principles and truth seeking way. And that the injustices and the corruption and the just like the false, just the fakeness of a lot of things have done that. And I think Bitcoin's been a large part of that, but also in my own personal journey of recognizing, what is life about? Is it about, just making money and serving my own gratifications of in the moment, in the here and now, or really leaving a bigger legacy and leaving an impact on people, right? So a little bit about myself. I started as a software engineer. My graduate degree was in computer science, and I got a job at Amazon, and it was fulfilling, but in the beginning. But through that process, like even though I was working on software that touched millions of lives directly, I was doing immaterial things, right? I was moving around widgets. I was trying to make it a little bit more user friendly. Um, but it was immaterial, right? Like I would reduce the load time by a couple milliseconds, but it wasn't like who cares, right?
Mm.
And the money was good, and you kind of live a lifestyle that kind of gives you golden handcuffs. Um, but I started on a journey of questioning, what it is that I want to do with my life. And so I started volunteering a couple of years ago at a youth shelter, and I saw how disconnected, the young people were who were, at risk, and didn't really have a support system, a family or friends that really helped them live a fulfilling life, right? They were dependent on the system, they were dependent on the paychecks, they were dependent on the provisions of food, housing. And through that process, like I developed a heart to help the disadvantaged, the underserved. And so what I ended up doing is starting a nonprofit called Reach Out to work with these young people and help them establish, independence. And I believe that Bitcoin will play a large part in that, of helping educate them to get their financial kind of future in order, right? And helping educate them about, what money is and how to build equity. And because right now, in this fiat system, you can't really trade your time for money and live a life that you want to live, right? You're beholden to the system. And I just want to give back to the community in a way that's meaningful, and that when I'm gone, that the lives that I've touched will improve them, but they also reach back and reach out to others. Um, so yeah, it's been quite the journey of seeking truth, understanding that there's corruption, that there's a way out, and just really spending my time in a way that's valuable, and that really changes lives.
Well, that's
That
awesome, man. That's
Yeah.
very, very commendable. And it's interesting. I ask because it's such a common thing that I hear, and I usually kind of umbrella characterize it as for some reason being involved in Bitcoin just reorients your value hierarchy. Let's say
Yep.
how you determine what's valuable in your life, and it goes from being material to the immaterial, right? Things like love and relationships and goodwill and family and nature and health. Like these things ascend the hierarchy, and all the bullshit kind of drops away. And the interesting question there is kind of why. And I think one influence is perhaps there's an opportunity cost there. Like, well, do I want to buy the Lambo, or do I want to stack more sats? Well, I want to stack more sats, but I think I don't think that accounts for too much of it. I do, another possibility is that, you want to preserve your Bitcoin as long as possible. You drop your time preference. So you're not getting the satisfaction of material gain as much. And I think it's just natural for your brain to say, well, from where should I derive value if I'm not getting it from all these traditional sources that I would have otherwise gotten it? If I'm, committed to not buying a lot of shit, well, where am I getting the satisfaction of value from? And then maybe you kind of expand your horizon and you look at it more deeply and you say, oh, I can see value in these immaterial things. I can see value in these charitable things. I can see value in these things that I had neglected before that are actually free, that don't cost anything, but are tremendously valuable. I think that's part of the process too. And I also just think that somehow the qualities that seem to characterize Bitcoin, that seem to be imbued in it some way, which, I think truth and fairness and freedom I think these are, fundamental to Bitcoin. And I think that they are so fundamental end up kind of rubbing off on people, or at least sending signals to people of a similar kind. And these just over time kind of upgrade your perception in that way, or tune it to valuing those things. And when you're looking for those things out in the world, I mean, they're not to be found in, the expensive handbag. They're to be found in like human connection and human relationships, and they're to be found in how you feel about yourself, and they're to be found in how your body feels, and they're to be found in the degree of sovereignty and freedom you've established in your life. And then the things that become valuable end up being the things that foster that, things that allow you to become more sovereign and more free, and have more time to do the things that you enjoy or you find meaningful. And all of that becomes more valuable. And that, and I'm sure much more, is kind of wrapped up in this phenomenon that again happens to so many people I talk to, where they get into Bitcoin, they start noticing these changes. The longer they're in, the more they're pronounced they are, to the point where, very similar to you, it's like a lot of that frivolous stuff drops away. A lot of those meaningless conversations, a lot of those old, unproductive habits, let's say, just fall away. And the mind is more tuned to like trying to identify value, and then trying to engage and amplify that value and meaning to the extent possible. And it's really interesting is not the right word. It's really uplifting to see the products of that. And I think it's, we're just at the beginning of this. What you just mentioned, Bitcoiners seem to me to be incredibly charitable. Like if there's anyone that ever needs support, people pile on, on Twitter, and financial support, and there's all sorts of projects being launched. Most of the time people are doing it, without financial compensation, or they're even, contributing their own finances to get these projects, social projects, community projects, that kind of stuff off the ground. And I think you only have the capacity to do that if you feel secure and stable yourself. And so a lot of Bitcoiners are only just kind of beginning to feel that way, kind of coming out of the fiat system, reorienting their life and their career and all that kind of stuff, and developing a greater sense of security over the future. Kind of, they know they're going to be safe. They know they're going to be stable. And as a result, their resources become available to pursue the things that are most meaningful to them. And a lot of times it's helping others. And so, I can imagine as everything proceeds here, as the years go by, that there's going to be a tremendous amount of, it's not even just charity's too narrow, but, there's going to be a tremendous amount of dedication to, really meaningful causes by these people who are satisfied and fulfilled in themselves. And they want to expand that outward to people in their lives, or broadly in the world. And I think I think it's beautiful, first of all, but there's always this question like, well, if the state isn't there, who's going to take care of the people that fall through the cracks? And my answer is often, way fewer people are going to fall through the cracks, because we're going to have less theft, way more abundance, and there's just, there's going to be far more opportunity in the world. So there'll be, the less people to quote unquote take care of. And then there's going to be much more capacity for every individual to contribute and help take care of people, in their locales, in their communities, or what have you. And yeah, your story just made me think about that. And once I start thinking about it, as I said, I think of so many, just how generous Bitcoiners can be. And I think that's a result of this change in their perception of value and what's important in life, but it's also a change in their capacity to take care of themselves, and how that stability emanates outward into the benefit of other people's lives.
Yeah, and I mean, your case in point of just spending all these hours of interviewing and getting the word out there, it's more about the education and bringing people into the loop, into the circle, and into the know of how the system is broken and how there's an opportunity out. And it's funny to kind of expand on the answer to your question. My shift has gone, I feel like I've disconnected my value, or my perceived value of Bitcoin, from its monetary price. Like I'm unimpacted by, there's a price drop, like that doesn't impact me in the slightest, right? It's, if anything, it's an opportunity to accumulate more. But
Right.
But just in that regard, like it's no longer a financial asset that's the most valuable part of Bitcoin. It's using it as a tool to really establish and teach and use that as the basis for helping spark conversation of what's wrong with this world and what the solution is, right? And I think that's going to be a big part of reach out, of using that as the tool to to educate people. And to your point of, what is the purpose, and people are searching for meaning, I'll kind of very quickly share what the long-term vision is for reach out, but also the short-term vision. In the short term, what I really want to do is work with young men who have been disenfranchised, to become independent. And the system is such that it provides fish, but it doesn't teach anyone to fish, right? Like I've been volunteering for a while, and part of the experiences of learning how the system works has led me to start this nonprofit, specifically work with young people who build this unintentionally build this sense of entitlement, because of what they're given. And then it just creates a dependency. It creates a dependency that this is expected of them. And it really takes away their dignity of, no, you can go out there and earn way more. You're so much more capable.
Yeah.
I kind of experienced that in the corporate world with golden handcuffs of, it's just limiting you. And I was very fortunate the way I was raised, and the work ethic that my parents who immigrated here instilled in me. But I really want to use that to help others. And so the right now I'm working with working on creating social enterprises to help them understand what it means to have equity, and what it means to just work hard and put your mindset into something instead of just accepting, handouts. And I think that's the most powerful thing that I can do as an individual, and hopefully establish an organization that can scale my impact in such a way that really empowers people to really work towards putting their efforts into a way that helps them expand and grow, and help others expand and grow, right? Through building equity, through social enterprises, and helping them to tease out what their talents are in a way that creates independence. So that's kind of like my near term. But for the long term of reach out, what I want it to be is connecting people with causes that they're passionate about. So many, if you ask anyone about whether they would volunteer their time to do something in an organization or something, everyone will say yeah, right? But the gap between saying yeah and actually doing it is so large, not because the people don't want to do it, but there's just friction. You don't know where to go. You don't know what you're going to be doing. You don't know what impact you're going to have. And all these things, all these friction points prevent people from donating their time and their talent in a way that's meaningful, that's important, right? And so my long-term goal for reach out is to actually create a avenue for people to easily connect with causes that they're passionate about, right? There should be somewhere where I can go and easily find a cause and organization where I could volunteer my time and talent to the greater good. And that doesn't exist right now in a way that's intuitive, that's easy to use, and that's frictionless of connecting them with that cause. So the whole idea of reach out is long term will be to create those connection points of someone who, yeah, I want to volunteer. Well, what's the easiest way to connect you to whatever cause or organization that you're passionate about? But that's kind of the long term, and I'm brainstorming with ideas with a couple engineer former coworkers of how to build a system out like that. But yeah, one step at a time. There's a lot going on with what I'm trying to do with youth today, to help build their toolkits to really utilize the things that they've been blessed with, despite their unfortunate circumstances, in the current day.
Yeah, that's really cool. So what kind of methods do you use to get them to, discover gifts, let's say, or to assume more responsibility and like what, how do you, because I assume, like, well, I don't know how to, am I right in assuming that there's a resistance by this group of people, or are they generally very enthusiastic about the help that they're receiving? Like, how do you get them to, buy in,
Well,
basically?
well, it's really just giving them words of encouragement. I mean, it's so crazy. The other day I was walking by the parking lot of one of the shelters, and this kid had a softball and a couple of gloves, and I just spent the time with him to just throw it in the alleyway. And he was, after just 5 minutes or 10 minutes of throwing the ball and getting to asking some questions, he's a regular at the shelter. Um, he was just so grateful. He was just so grateful for someone to stop and talk to him. And bright kid, um, that 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 didn't have that, right? Like, I was raised in a family where it was a very humble upbringing, I won't lie, but the work ethic was something that was incredible, that was instilled in me from my parents. Um, and it was just like, you don't complain, you just do what you have to do, and you'll get what you need. But these kids that frequent these shelters, either came out of the foster system or had broken family, broken households, and they didn't learn these things. And then they come into a system where everything's provided for them and there's no accountability. And the focus of all these organizations is to make them feel better versus
Mm,
really get them to hold them accountable in a way that helps them grow and have dignity and have satisfaction and really have zest for life, right? And so, to answer your question, the pushback isn't there. It's more a sense of hope, of like, oh wow, just I can do this. I can, if I'm held accountable. So, and it's not all like that. Some have fallen victim to the system in a way that there's more entitlement. But my focus, there's no shortage of folks of young people who want to grow, want to exceed, in with the skill sets that they have, but they just never got those words of encouragement. It's all, oh, we'll give you this and we'll make you feel good, and we want to make sure that your feelings aren't hurt. But they need that hard love, right? And
yeah.
that's what's missing from the welfare state today. And you got UBI coming, and all these things are inevitable, but creating opportunities for these kids to say, yeah, you can accomplish whatever you want, and give them a little bit of education to get them that jump start and that passion to put in the work, right? So that's really my goal, is to find the kids who want to help themselves and give them an opportunity. I mean, it's crazy how talented these kids are. Sometimes I'll do street outreach, and there was a case where, I approached this group, and it was, clearly they were, struggling and with, addiction and stuff. But man, some of these conversations I have are like wild. You would never think that someone that's sitting in this doorway or this alleyway, of how much knowledge they have, through
Mm,
whatever medium that they use, Twitter or Reddit, but they don't have that path to get out of the system. They don't know what they need to do. And so my current vision is, right now I'm starting, actually just went into verbal agreement with a coffee shop. And after sharing the story with the owner, he's like, listen, you got this full coffee shop to your disposal. Like, use this as the platform to train these kids, and give them the basic skills that they need to carve out a path for themselves. Um, and one of my next goals is going to be I'm looking at some other spaces to potentially start a wraparound shelter where not only provides them housing, but a very structure that helps them, take responsibility, take accountability in a way that the system doesn't really provide.
that's incredible, man. Kudos for doing that. My interactions with people like that, underserved or in difficult situations, I've always just the honesty has always been so uh on display, I guess. And because I think you can, if you walking around in normie land, you know, whether it's at your job or wherever, like everyone's always got kind of a facade going, you know, like everyone's repping their status or their job or who they, you know, whatever. Like people are kind of, you know, they're
Trying to put on a face.
yeah, exactly. Put something on. And with people in difficult like situations, you know, be it homeless or in shelters or whatever, like it's like, well, why am I going to put on it? I mean, it is what it is, right? I'm here. This is me. I'm in a situation. Like, why would I lie about anything? And I've always found the just like blunt honesty very endearing when I've encountered people like that. But you know, it's well, first thing, are you sprinkling in a little Bitcoin education, you know, with these youngsters? Like, I don't know if you're familiar with Mi Primero Bitcoin in El Salvador, but it's this like Bitcoin diploma program that I think they just like maybe yesterday did. So they go through like a several week program in one of the public schools. And then right now, this probably won't be the case for all of them, but as it's getting going, like a bunch of Bitcoiners go down to do their final exam. And the final exam is, you know, like setting up a wallet and a seed and restoring a wallet and doing a transaction and all this kind of stuff. And it's basically them, you know, teaching them the basics of Bitcoin and custody, and so that they can avail of that skill for themselves. And of course, they can teach their peers and be a source of information or knowledge for their peers. And I just think, I mean, talk about economic empowerment. What could be more empowering than getting someone at any age, but particularly a young person, to like really understand and be confident enough to engage this tool and, you know, to bring into their life all the amazing things that we've been discussing throughout this conversation. So are you dabbling, are you sprinkling in a little Bitcoin on any of this
100%,
work you're doing?
100%. And actually, one of the visions I have is for payment, for compensation as part of this like training platform for, you know, a barista, because they, you know, it's a good entry level job where it gives you exposure to like social interaction, but also a little bit technical skill with brewing, etc. My vision is obviously these details still need to be hashed out, but is to stream their compensation, right? Like I think Jack Mallers did this awesome video back in the day when they released streaming payments through Strike. And what I'd love to have them do, and I have to look into the, you know, the legal side and the regulatory side, but is to bypass the whole idea of getting a weekly paycheck or biweekly paycheck and just streaming their compensation right to their wallet, right?
Yeah.
And I still have to figure out if there's systems that make this a little bit easier to do from an accounting standpoint and everything, but get them set up with a wallet and stream their compensation to their wallet if they want to. If they don't transact in Bitcoin, they can with Strike. There's an easy on ramp to load it back up into their bank account, or they can load it up onto, you know, send a lightning payment to a product like Pay with Moon, where they offer the credit cards and add it to their digital wallet for transactions. So like really integrating a wraparound service of education and really not just learning in a classroom what it means to use Bitcoin, but actually make it happen in their lives, and right, and put on these on-ramps and these educational tools to help them become part of the ecosystem and learn by doing versus learning by trying to read or listen and educate themselves that way. So I definitely want to, that's kind of a nice to have that I'd really like to explore from the get-go. And even do some of the enable Bitcoin transactions for purchase of goods. So that's one way that I'm exploring, but also, you know, putting up, you know, starting educational seminars. So I'm looking at a couple spaces last week and this week for programming where we could put on workshops. And have dedicated space to do seminars and invite the community to hold workshops on educating anything. Because I mentioned that example with the kid that I interact with just throwing the ball. It's those little touch points that these kids need, right? Of good influence, of opportunity, and just things showing that people care about them, right? So I do want to go with like a workshop of through Bitcoin, whether it's you know, Bitcoin EDU, which is actually how we met. You probably don't remember this, but in Miami during the conference, there was the event that Breedlove had with JP Sears and Jordan Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
And I was helping Eric kind of set up the event before people arrived, and that's where I met. So Eric has Bitcoin EDU. I don't know if you know Eric Podvoisky.
Probably.
That I don't know if
Not
that's
ringing
how
a
he
bell
says
right
it.
now.
I don't know if that's how he says his name, but that's how it's pronounced because it's Polish.
Right.
I speak Polish. But the other thing is, also I met Greg Foss there, where he has the
Oh
looking
shit.
glass.
I know. Sorry. I do know who you're talking about. Yeah, I do.
And
And Looking Glass with Foss and the boys, right?
yeah, so
Yeah, yeah.
I'm looking to. I still haven't formulated an official kind of plan, but I definitely want to incorporate some sort of resource that Bitcoiners have been working on to into like a core curriculum about this before they get started, and give them introduction of what the rails are like and how to set themselves up, and really educate. So yeah, absolutely, I definitely want to pepper in as much as I can for this great innovation in the monetary space called Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, that'd be super cool, man. And if you do it, and you want to like get some photos or whatever, just let me know, and I'm happy to share around whatever you're doing. But
Awesome.
how cool would it be, like, if let's say you and your peer are working at Starbucks, and your buddy gets paid every other week, right? And every minute you're seeing a notification, your phone come in and getting paid. Like, that's the kind of shit that it's kind of inconsequential, right? Like, there's no difference in how much money you're getting, but it's just cool. That's coolness factor, like, off the charts. And so, like, if that was the case with me when I was working like a normal, like a basic retail job, let's say, like, I know everyone would be jealous of it. It makes no difference really, but it's super cool. Like, hey, you got to wait 2 weeks for your money. I'm getting my money, like, while we're standing here. And it's that kind
Right.
of stuff that I think would foster a lot of interest. Like, we tend to focus on the monetary and economic and the monetary history case. What 99% of people ain't ever going to care about that. It's just
Mhm.
it's out of their wheelhouse. But people will care about, getting their money more quickly and making it more
Right.
easily to spend their money and making it easier to save their money. And like, people will care about the utility that this new money provides. They just won't care necessarily about the philosophy and the mechanics of it all.
Right, but it's the start of that rabbit hole, right? It's like, oh
Mm-hmm.
wait, I can get payments by the hour, or by the day, whatever that cadence is. And that's going to spread like a wildfire
Oh
among
yeah.
their peers, and
Mm-hmm.
it's going to pique their interest, and it's like, oh, hey, I'm doing this. You want to learn? Come drop in on this workshop. So there's a virality, opportunity here of like application, right? Because if you see the effects, if you see the utility, the function that this enables, through Lightning, it'll expand, and they'll share with their peers, because that's absolutely something that they'll talk about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're receiving the benefit of the instant transaction, and the hearing that notification that they're getting paid or whatever. And it gets them excited, and it starts them down that journey of learning, oh, what is this? Why have I never heard of this? Right. And then they
Mm-hmm.
share it, and it creates like this pool of awareness among their peers, and I think it definitely is a big opportunity.
Totally.
And so I
And
don't
yet,
know if
no, go
you've
ahead.
heard of an application like that, or if anyone else is doing that in terms of compensation for their time or through work. But if infrastructure like that exists, or there are tools or APIs that make this a little bit easier, I'd love to hear about it. Or if through your network, you've know of someone that might be doing something similar, or thinking about something similar.
Yeah, nothing rings a bell currently, but I'd be surprised if something didn't exist or wasn't in the works for
Mhm.
something like that. Like you say, I mean, maybe the accounting would be a pain in the ass, but that seems like a very solvable problem. So I suspect solutions are coming if they're not here. So I'll definitely forward any I come across along. But just going back for a sec to the whole social safety net and the circumstance that currently prevails. And this goes to what we were saying earlier. Like, people just don't yet have and even we don't have a full appreciation for the downstream effects of changing something so fundamental as the money. And as you were speaking, I was just thinking, and I think I've mentioned this or talked about this before, but like, it's not just that, government will be less of a leech on society, free markets will bloom, there'll be more opportunity, there'll be more abundance, right? And it's not just that people will be wealthier and they'll have more stability and they'll have more availability, both in time and financial resources, to contribute to people that fall through the cracks in their community. But like, what's the influence of economic deprivation on broken homes? It's obviously massive, right? Like, money is a huge stressor and is, probably the reason why, the main divisive issue in relationships that leads to divorces, if not the main, definitely up there. And so what happens when that's dramatically dialed down? Well, you get less broken homes. What impact does that have? You get less kids in foster homes, and less kids getting into trouble, and less kids without the proper guidance and examples and mentors and all that kind of stuff. And like, we could probably sit here and conjure up like another 10 of those things that have that social impact as a direct consequence of changing the nature of the money. And so I think it's well, I guess we're all probably underappreciating just how much benefit changing the money will how much benefit there will be from changing the money like that, because it's not super obvious to people, because these concerns haven't really been thought about too much before. And certainly we've never had the opportunity to think about these things in relation to an asset or money like Bitcoin. But when those people start talking about like or the necessity for maintaining some of these, social or political structures as they exist today, I just think they're viewing this far too narrowly, and just how many and how consequential the impacts of an improved form of money will be on so many of the things that generate the so-called, negative outcomes that we experience in society today.
Mm-hmm. And the young folks who are at risk, they don't understand the concept of inflation and of how fiat is stealing through this invisible taxation, but they feel it. They know when they go to the store that Red Bull or that bread or that a meal costs more, right? But they don't necessarily know what the root cause is. And if Bitcoin is that opportunity to explain to them what this is, like, it's dual purpose, right? They're seeing the utility of these instant transactions, but also it gets them down that journey of education and understanding and knowledge of what is going on in the system, right? Mm-hmm. And so aside from the monetary paradigm, the educational properties of Bitcoin are just huge, as we've talked about this whole podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, again, money is the greatest incentive, right? And it seems to be incentive, as that incentive works on as it compels you to understand it, as you said right at the beginning, it compels you almost to understand. In order to understand Bitcoin, you end up having to understand so many other things and re-understand or recapitulate so many other things. And that just ends up, the end result of that is just a renewed perception of the world. And I think we both agree, a more productive and more hopeful one. And what's more important to inculcate in kids that have been underserved or disadvantaged, a renewed sense of hope or an opportunity, and that the future can be better, and that they can actualize more of their potential in that future. I mean, that's seemingly what could be more important than that, really.
Amen.
Got anything else? We good?
I think that's good. Yeah, we covered a lot. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good note to close it on. But like I said, I mean, I think it's super cool what you're doing. And so, if there's photos or if there's places you want to direct people, well, you can do that now, or when the time comes, you can just shoot stuff over to me or tag me on Twitter and stuff, and be happy to try to get it out to more people.
Perfect. I will definitely take advantage of your offer. And right now, I'm not sure if there's any direction. I mean, the organization's called reachout.org. There isn't really much content on there now, because it's more, working behind the scenes and trying to figure out the right strategy.
Bitcoin donations, Lightning donations.
Oh, absolutely.
You should set up a BTC Pay server or something. Or
or
many ways.
Have you heard of my thought was, I was gonna register with the Giving Block. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I'm not, I don't think I'm too familiar with them.
Oh, it's just a platform that helps facilitate and make it easier to give Bitcoin donations.
Right.
But
Yeah, I think I
but
have
yeah,
heard of it, but I'm not super familiar.
yeah, but there's a lot of work to do, a lot of work ahead, but I just really appreciate the exposure. I love what you're doing, from interviewing the legends to plebs, and just keep doing what you're doing, and hopefully this reaches some ears that maybe this creates some opportunities, some connections of, obviously there's a lot of work to do, and if anyone is so touched that they want to contribute or something, they could reach out, um, either on Twitter. I don't know how that works, if you link like a Twitter handle or what,
Yeah,
but they can
I'll
email.
put your handle in the show notes, and yeah, that's the best. If anyone's listening to this and they want your info, they can just check the show notes on the podcast.
Awesome. Or they could just go to reachout.org, and I think there's a contact form and email address that they can use.
Sweet. Well, man, I appreciate the kind words. I really love the work you're doing as well, and I look forward to chatting in, sometime in the future, 6 and 12 months, we can get an update on all the goings on.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to providing it, and just appreciate you, brother.
All right, brother. You too. Take care.
Take care, brother.
See ya.